Okay, right. Thank you very much. So good evening from Plymouth. I don't know where everyone else is, but we're so delighted to have Wera Hobhouse join us this evening. Welcome to Wera. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to members joining us as well for the first of 3 Q&As that we're having with the leadership candidates who have declared so far. It's really exciting that you can all join us. There are some sort of house rules going up in the chat room, so just basically please feel free to post your questions there and keep your microphones on mute, and then when you are asked, to ask your question, please go on and ask away. Just to introduce you to Wera, I'm sure that you know, but Wera has been MP in Bath since 2017 and was also a councillor on Rochdale Council before that, and has been a really strong voice in the Remain movement. So lots of you will be aware of that and of her work there. She's been a spokesperson for the party on climate change and the environment since February 2019, and also did all of that work on the private members bill, presenting that amendment to the Sexual Offences Act around upskirting and making that a criminal offence. So without further ado, thank you so much, Wera. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And the Southwest is my home. And so I always feel most comfortable when I meet and re-meet members from the Southwest. And we need to keep engaging and talking to each other and ultimately changing our political fortunes in order to win as Liberal Democrats locally and nationally. And I'm absolutely committed to that. And thank you for your warm welcome. Wherever I come to your local parties, I felt that warmth around me, and that is just fun and very reassuring. So now I'm standing here because I'm standing for the leadership, and tonight I want to set out my pitch. I've had a number of these new Zoom meetings with local parties across the country, and it works best really when it's not just me lecturing from my bit of the Zoom picture, but if we start to have a bit of a discussion around how we're going forward as a party. So a leadership contest is not only about who we actually elect as the next leader, but really where we want to go as a party. And that's very much a discussion that I would like to have during this leadership contest. And that's the discussion I would like to have tonight with all of you. So where do I come from? I believe that we are not just suspended as a party between the left and the right. We have to reclaim our tradition as a progressive party and reformulate our progressive ambitions. We can call that center-left. It's probably best formulated as a progressive party. That's who we are. We are not somewhere hanging there in the center of a political spectrum, but we are a progressive party. We passionately believe in social justice. We believe in global equalities and global justice. We stand and defend civil liberties and international and human rights. And we are active climate campaigners, precisely because if we leave the climate change unchecked, it will create the most enormous global inequalities. And quite apart from the fact that it is terrible for our planet, is that really a world that we would live in where global inequalities are so acute that we are permanently fighting wars and migration and the shrinking of land which we can inhabit? So we also believe, of course, in good public services, well-run public services. We are sharing a lot of these values with the progressive left. And we shouldn't be worried to share that territory. We are not the Labour Party. We don't have its authoritarian tendencies. We don't look at the world in the prism of a class war. We don't actually believe that everything can be just defined in this sort of polarized way of private against public. We believe in enterprise and business. In fact, for tackling the climate emergency, for us, it's very important to harness the dynamism and energy of business and enterprise. So there are lots of things where we're also very different from the Labour Party, and particularly, and I say that as having been a local councillor for 10 years, we are just much better local campaigners because we passionately believe in local decision making, devolving powers to local communities. We believe in communities, we believe in the power of local democracy, and we just provide so much better local campaigners and local councillors where they get elected. So that's where I sort of generally come from politically. And I always say a progressive alliance is particularly there for the national picture. So at local level, of course, we fight, you know, where we fight, whatever's there, the Greens, the Labour Party, and the Tories. But in terms of message, of course, we have similar values as other progressive parties. I believe we need to absolutely break with the coalition years. I think what the last 10 years have produced is the most right-wing government in decades, a party that has ruthlessly attacked the welfare state, a party that has delivered Brexit, a party that nearly destroyed us in 2015, and a party which associates us, or the coalition, which continues to associate us with austerity, which has created even bigger social inequality. So it is important that we move forward and can break with a coalition, and that's one of the main reasons why I'm standing. I'm standing, as I've already said, because I think I'm the most credible candidate to actually defend our local government base, because I've been there, I've done it, I know how important it is to have actually the power to make your own decision and formulate your own messages locally, rather than being sort of hampered by over-centralization. I've also worked politically in the Northwest and now in the Southwest. Again, I think it's important to actually recognize that one size doesn't fit all, because you understand that different regions and different areas across the UK have got their different issues and need the freedom, albeit with a generalized message of us being liberal, but then allowing us the freedoms locally to very much hone into our localized messages. And then last but not least, I always say I'm a hard liberal. I come from Germany, people know that possibly, and I was active while I was a student, and I fought the communists. In those days, the threat to liberalism came from the left, and I have learned that tolerance can only go so far, and the vexed question about how do we respond to intolerance as a tolerant party. It continues to be one of the big questions of this day. I read, I was possibly a bit of an anorak, but I read The Open Society and Its Enemies from Karl Popper. These sort of questions are here again. Who do we work with? And I'd say we need to be much tougher about drawing our lines, where we draw our line, and we don't work with intolerant movements and tendencies. And I'd say the Tory party is very much at the edge of becoming a very intolerant force in British politics, and we need to be tough to fight that. So we need to defeat the Tories at the next general election. We need to form a progressive alliance for that. At local level, we fight as liberals on the values that I've just sort of broadly outlined. And now over to you and your questions.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic to hear all of your views and to give us a flavour of what we could expect. Whilst I'm waiting for someone to put their hand up, I know all the questions will start to flood in, or if you want to type a question, please do. Actually, we have got a question, so I will ask, I'm going to hand over to Hugh. Hugh, if you want to sort of come on mic and ask your question, that would be fantastic.
Hello, hello, Vera.
Hello.
Very nice to see you again. Excellent. Yes, the question is, as ghastly as this government is, we are stuck with them for a good 4 years. How will you, as leader, create a higher profile for our party, much as Keir Starmer has done relatively quickly for Labour?
I think we just have to be a bit bolder and a little bit more prepared to be controversial. So I was disappointed in the last few months that we didn't call out the government earlier about its decision around COVID, for example, because it was very clear, and becomes increasingly clear, that this Tory government was responding in a very right-wing ideological way to this virus in many ways, like Trump and Bolsonaro and right-wing governments have responded to it. First, playing down its severity, then creating this idea about herd immunity. Progressive governments would have never responded in that way, and basically allowed the elderly and the vulnerable to become somewhat dispensable in order to save the economy for as long as possible. An economy has to work for all people, not just for a section of our people. And where we are becoming so cruelly discriminatory about ultimately the vulnerable or the elderly, or this idea that, you know, in the next going forward, it's the elderly who still have to shield for three months and be on their own, and so on and so forth, rather than looking at the whole of this issue, something that we need to solve as in solidarity with everybody, and protecting the most vulnerable. The way the government is continuously protecting business, which is fine, but really not looking at the most vulnerable, and, for example, universal credit, because a lot of people now need to go on universal credit. And why has the government not done more to support or, for example, increase universal credit? Because it becomes very clear that it's not enough. So why haven't we as Liberal Democrats also then much more boldly criticized the government for its right-wing approach to tackling the crisis, with all the other consequences that are part of that? We didn't have enough PPE, we didn't want to work with the European Union. This whole divisive approach to tackling the COVID crisis is one of the things where I, as a Lib Dem leader, would have been much more critical from the very beginning, rather than sort of go along and say, oh yeah, you know, the scientists are around them. Now we suddenly know scientists advise and politicians make decisions. I thought that was very clear from the very beginning. I think as Liberal Democrats, we could have been a lot more controversial from the beginning. I had my discussions with my colleagues. They were worried that we would sound shrill. I think that's a very derisive way of looking at things. I think we need to be bold. We need to know why we are criticizing the government. We have to be obviously rational and evidence-based, but we should not be afraid to speak our mind.
Thanks, Vera. I know that there are members who felt really strongly about that issue, and they've agreed with you, particularly that we haven't been a strong enough voice during the crisis. So there's a comment in the comments from Saoirse Holloway from Plymouth saying she's really glad to hear you say that about not calling the government out. And I think people have been quite upset by that. I have another, just sort of sticking with that theme, there's also a question from Alisoneden. Alison, I don't know if you want to come on mic, because it kind of sticks with the same theme, if you want to ask your question about our sort of how we appear.
Yeah, hi Vera. Really relieved to hear you say that, because I feel like we've all been shouting at the television saying, you're lying to us. And it's not just that they're lying to us, they are literally killing us with their lies. And I feel like we missed, I think I want to hear my leader standing up in the Commons and accusing the government, without being unparliamentary, etc., of killing people, because they are. And we need to force them into a situation where they have to admit that they are prepared to kill a certain number of people to balance against their own nefarious priorities. So that's a statement, not a question. There was a question in there, which was, do you think, what kind of language, how will you bring that boldness into focus for us?
Yes, obviously some of this is very much around tone. And as I said before, we don't want to sound shrill, but we can very clearly point out where the government is just telling us, the scientific advisors, have said this, when clearly we have to say, this was a political decision, and we think, for example, going earlier into lockdown would have saved thousands of lives. And how dare the government come forward and basically let scientists hang out to dry there to defend decisions, when ultimately the decisions were made by the government, and the government made a decision to go into lockdown very late. And as you say, even a week, even a day, even 2 days could have saved thousands of lives. So the population nearly needs to be aware of it. We just have to spell it out and say it, rather than sort of holding back because we're a bit worried that it would sound shrill. You can say these things boldly without sounding shrill. And
Yes.
if you can, particularly if you can if you can evidence it, and that's what we are good at as Liberal Democrats, we are an evidence-based party. We could see the evidence from other countries. It was very clear that this government was trying to do something very different from other European countries. And let's face it, other European countries were relatively late to go into lockdown as well. But the British government was so late, and now we have clearly the highest number of deaths in Europe. We will probably be the party, the country that comes out of lockdown latest, and probably have damaged our ironically, our economy worse than in other countries. And the shambolic way that the government is trying to sort of get us out of lockdown now with mixed messages, that doesn't help anybody. And we can be a lot more outspoken. And I think we should have been much more outspoken from the very beginning, rather than just calling for a judge-led inquiry, which I think is a good idea. And we should still call for that. But there was more that we could have said at the time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Colin. If you'd like to ask Colin, I'm just sort of going back and forth through the messages here, hoping not to miss anybody out.
Thanks, Seema. Hi, Vera. I just wanted to ask you, I agree with a lot of, if you like, your manifesto, and the one most interesting point in there for me is you talk about having a progressive alliance, and I can definitely speak with experience from my in the Totnes constituency that we spent too much time thumping Labour, and we didn't really realise that, you know, who the real opposition were. But while I agree with the concept of a progressive alliance, could you give us a bit more detail about how you think that would work practically, particularly now things have moved on quite a bit. We don't have our friend Jeremy anymore, and Starmer's Labour Party looks to be moving in a very different direction, which will be probably a lot more electable.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that there's no space for us. And I think I have set that out very clearly at the beginning, where we are very different from the Labour Party. So we should understand, and the Labour Party has understood that as well, that if we want to defeat the Tories at the next general election, and I'm talking here about the general election, if we want to defeat the Tories at the next general election, we just need to work together. And this is not a massively new idea. The Liberal Democrats did this during our best electoral years, and that is under Paddy Ashton and Charlie Kennedy. And the arrangements were largely informal. We can have a debate about that. It also depends very much on the Labour Party. Currently, the Labour Party is not prepared to stand down candidates. But of course, you know, as you say, you can also campaign more or less in a particular area, and very quickly it becomes clear who's the front runner against the Tories. So clearly understanding where the Liberal Democrats are in second place, mostly in the seats in the southwest, and where the Labour Party is in second behind the Tories, and best place to defeat the Tories up in the northwest. We should just make sure that, you know, if we stand candidates, that we make sure that we don't set our fire against each other. And as you say, in Totnes, that happened. It happened in North East Somerset. You know, these things just cannot happen again in the future. And to build the trust here with the Labour Party, and that has to probably be done very much with talks starting very early now between a new leader and Keir Starmer, but also around finding, I always say that our shared messages around good public services, around social housing. So I have made sure that in our party manifesto, or one of our party policies, that we build 100,000 new social homes for rent, because I believe one of the very big problems about family households, even long before the corona crisis, was the cost of housing. And we will not resolve the housing crisis without building a lot more social homes for rent. Now, there is a complete overlap really with the ambition of the Labour Party. So we need to find also where we want to campaign together on issues. And then it becomes much clearer that we work together against the Tories certainly at a national level. At a local level, I will say that at a local level, it's quite different. And I'm not saying, you know, we have to repeat and replicate that everywhere at local level at all. And of course we want to win locally. And I always say, and I know that honestly, we are just the best community campaigners. We are best with the grassroots. We actually believe in it. We just don't use our communities for national elections. We want to win locally, and we don't turn our noses up at community politics. We love it. We believe in it. We think local democracy is important. So locally, it's a slightly different message, but for our national elections, if we want to defeat the Tories, we need to work together, and probably the way I see it coming is more informally than formal electoral pacts.
Thanks, Vera.
Thanks, Colin, for the question. Thanks, Vera. Sticking to that theme, there are a couple of other questions around this issue. Jim had a question around our relationship with the Green Party. I'm not sure if that's nationally or locally, but Jim, would you like to pose your question?
Yeah, good evening and thank you. What do you think our party's role should be in our relationship with the Green Party? The negotiations about standing down in favour of them last time were very protracted and left a lot of people, local campaigners, very unhappy on both sides, and I don't want that to repeat again. But we also need to differentiate with them. And how would you differentiate us from the Green Party? Sorry, it's a bit longer than it was written.
No, I understand that. I think you're right. Formal standing down is not necessarily very popular. It did work, but for example, in a seat like Bath, I defeated the Green Party anyway. And of course, one of the big issues is always, and I'm sure we come to this, is ultimately voting reform. And I would say one of the things where we absolutely need to work together in terms of messaging, and there's still quite a lot to do in the Labour Party, is that we all need to find a shared position on voting reform. But let's park that. So, you know, in this rubbish voting system, we can only ever sort of do the squeezing, and we're quite good at that at local level, or we had some arrangement with the Green Party. And I personally think, particularly because it's probably very unlikely that we can get the Labour Party to stand down, I think it has to be much more about a shared understanding of how vigorously we campaign in particular seats. And the electorate gets that. You know, if they get 10 leaflets from the Lib Dems and 1 from the Labour Party, they'll probably get who's up against the Tories. And the same if there was a seat that the Green Party could win apart from Brighton and, you know, where Caroline Lucas is. You know, let's wait and see. But what is it about how we differentiate ourselves from the Green Party? And I'm quite big on that because I formulated our policy, how we tackle the climate emergency. And the big difference is that we have a very clear and realistic plan. I find that the Green Party, they're very idealistic. They want us to get to net zero by 2025 or 2030, when clearly that is not going to work. So then they sort of divert and say, well, it's an ambition. If you're not ambitious, it will never happen. Whereas we believe very firmly that it's about evidence-based. We need to be credible and with the partners that we want to work with. That includes actually research and private enterprise, where they're on the right message of also wanting to get net zero and not being ideological about it and look at everybody else as the enemy. But trying to find collaborations and working together with organizations and businesses who clearly want to get to net zero and find evidence base for what works best and not being ideological about it. And that is around, you know, are we going, you know, what are we going to do about hydrogen? What are we going to do about electric vehicles? What are we going to do about an electricity grid? What are we going to do about aviation, for example, where we Liberal Democrats believe it's not aviation or flying that is the enemy, but it's fossil fuel gas with which that they're powered. But as soon as we find a gas that is net zero, a fuel that is net zero, you know, we are okay with flying. So I think as Liberal Democrats, we always demonstrate to people that ultimately we are realistic, we are pragmatic, and we are evidence-based. We are finding solutions rather than being ideologically stuck. And that's where we differentiate ourselves best, probably.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. I can't remember the details, but there was a piece of news this week about how we hadn't burned coal for quite a long period of time, which I think is frustrating for us, because I think that was as a result of some of the really good policies that were put in place during the coalition years. But the general public, we don't always make those connections. So it'd be really lovely, I think, if as a party we could start to really show the good things that we're doing and that we can influence. There was another question from Stuart Spicer, which I think was kind of the last one on this theme of party identity and progressive alliances. So Stuart, if you wanted to ask your question, go ahead.
Yes, so it was a kind of a bit of a two-part question, if that's okay. So you've been making this really interesting point about the need for us to work with other progressive parties, including Labour. So firstly, how would we ensure we would retain our distinct identity in that kind of progressive alliance? And secondly, how would we ensure that Labour are receptive to this idea?
So first of all, you know, a lot of politics in the end is about people and relationships. There's a lot of soul searching going on in the Labour Party as well. The Labour Party itself hasn't suddenly changed because they've got a new leader, but one of the most partisan and stuck in the mud Labour MPs, you know, in the red wall areas, as they're called, are now no longer members of the Parliamentary Labour Party. So I think the current makeup of the Parliamentary Labour Party is much more open to these types of discussions, and they have to be had very quickly because it's not going to be easy. It's of course easy where I've already said it's very clear who's a runner-up, and it's the most likely to beat the Conservatives, because you have to see it under that overall picture. So which of any of our progressive parties is the most likely to beat the Conservatives at the next general election? And I keep repeating, it is about the general election. And then there are of course seats where we you know, either it's not clear, or where we are fighting the Labour MP, and you know, but there are the exceptions. For the vast majority of seats, it's very clear where we are fighting the Labour Party, and there's just different politics in different regions and areas of the United Kingdom. I mean, if you're fighting Labour here in the southwest, where they were largely I'd say middle, you know, centre left, and they were pro-European. It's very, very different where you're fighting some hard Labour up in the north and in the northwest and northeast. And I've been there, I tell you that. So there's obviously a lot of local variety, and I think again, leaving it a little bit to the local areas and regional parties to formulate exactly which seats and on which level this engagement is going to take place with the other parties. I think it works best if we don't dictate that from the centre, but if we give regional and local parties a much greater say in that.
Was that question from, that was Stuart, wasn't it?
Thank you.
I mean, does that largely sort of address what you're saying? But I'm happy to sort of you know, if you want to come back on this question, it is not easy. I mean, I've said before, I don't know everything. It would be very, very boring if I just sort of came here and lectured you with what I thought. I think the best ideas come when we are developing ideas together. But I think this is at least the direction that we need to go into. And this is why I'm saying new direction. We need to sort of formulate a new direction where we're walking together, and the detail of some of what I'm proposing is still up for debate.
I think it's really relevant at the moment because across Devon and Cornwall we are thinking about what kind of progressive alliances we might make, where we may have an agreement or an informal agreement with the Greens. That's been provoking a lot of discussion amongst local parties and the regional parties as well. So I think it's, as you say, some of these things it's best to come down to local parties when it's at local government level, but it's still tricky, isn't it, to, you know, you can't have a kind of hard and fast set of rules about how we approach it.
And also it's around the issue. I mean, I'm not just working with the Green Party because they're called the Green Party, but because I want to tackle the climate emergency. So if if we really find solutions together, or we can find an agreement of what to do at local level, for example, to get to net zero by 2030, or wherever we have got a declared climate emergencies and want to get to that. So a lot of these things is what I'm saying is also about just our joint messaging, where other local parties from other persuasions, Green or Labour, are coming behind with us, behind certain messages of what we want to do, you know, whether we want to, in which way we want to set up a clean air zone, or whether we can actually deliver more social housing in our local areas. These sort of issues are the ones that we need to work together with other parties. So I believe a lot of it is not just about, you know, sort of the shell of working together, but actually going into the detail of the solutions that we're wanting to get. I mean, the outcomes matter in the end, what we deliver for our local communities and our people. It's not just because I'm Wera and I've got blue eyes, I'm going to do that. It's because I'm standing for something and I want to deliver something. That's what motivates me. I want an outcome. And I think a lot of what we do as Liberal Democrats, and that's why we are not ideological, and that's why I love my party. It's not about an ideology as such. It is about a direction, it's about values, and then we get there in a pragmatic way and we look for partners. That's how I would look at the overall picture.
Thanks, Wera. There's a question from Julian Brazil. He's been waiting patiently for a while. It was one of the earliest questions. So Julian, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Seema, and hello, Wera. Just if I may, just say something about the alliance. Personally, I think the Lib Dem should make a unilateral declaration that in Tory Labour marginals, we will withdraw candidates if the Labour candidate will sign a pledge saying that they will support proportional representation. So we're not going into some convoluted discussions with Labour. We just put it out there that if they sign a pledge to support proportional representation, we won't stand a candidate, and we will encourage Liberals to support the Labour candidate. And there may even be occasions where a Tory might do that, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not, you know. But I think rather than, because we've seen Labour would never seem to want any form of a progressive alliance at all. They just want a progressive party, and they think that's them, and no one else is of any.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah, but that's just my comments on that. My question is, what are your views on nuclear power and indeed the Trident defence system that we have here in the South?
There's obviously two questions, two separate things here. I believe we can provide for the energy needs of this country without needing nuclear power. I've been quite a passionate anti-nuclear campaigner. If you're watching my video, we are putting the link out there at the end of the meeting. I've launched my video today, so you can watch it. And at the very beginning, where I come from politically was when I was actually marching with the anti-nuclear waste disposal campaigners, because they were going to put a sort of long-term waste disposal site near my hometown in Hanover. And I've been an anti-nuclear power campaigner for a long time. And I do believe there's plenty of evidence that we do not need nuclear in the mix in order to provide for our national energy needs. We are a country that's very lucky that we can actually cover our needs with renewable energy. In fact, we can overproduce produce if only we want it. And there's many technologies now that allow us to actually store, to produce hydrogen, all sorts of innovative ways of what we can do with renewable energy. So just let's produce it. Let's not put these ideological barriers towards renewable energy, be that for onshore wind or wherever, or the solar panels on particular roofs don't look right and all the rest of it. Let's just make sure we are a leader, a world leader or a European leader, whatever, in renewable energy. This idea about that we need to provide a base power or base load is also very old-fashioned thinking. Apparently modeling shows there's only ever one day now, sometime in January, where we wouldn't have enough base load, even currently. So that's a very overcomable thing. So nuclear energy, I don't believe in. It doesn't make any sense financially. That's the other thing that always comes up. And renewable energy is so much more affordable. So let's just stop investing more money into nuclear energy. We are going to build Hinkley, but honestly, I think that's already far too much. So that's nuclear energy. What do I think about Trident? I know it sounds in many ways perverse, but the idea about the nuclear deterrent has worked. The only time in history that two nuclear bombs were thrown onto two cities was when only one power, the US, had the ability to actually produce and drop a nuclear bomb. Ever since, there are other players, and each country sort of, or several countries, are threatening each other with pulling or pressing the button. We haven't had a nuclear, a bomb thrown down onto a city or a community. So, in a very perverse way, the idea about a deterrent works. That doesn't mean that I'm committed to multilateral disarmament of nuclear weapons. I absolutely believe we have completely halted and stagnated here. We need to continue to push for a nuclear-free world. I'm passionately committed to that as well. But I think unilateral disarmament is something that simply wouldn't work, and the deterrent does work, however perverse that sounds.
Thank you very much. Julian, were you happy with that? Did you want to ask anything else?
I'm sure this is one of the things where people are passionately divided, and I know that. And we had Lib Dem conferences where we were discussing this sort of multilateral, unilateral disarmament. And, you know, you just come down on one or the other side of the argument, and that's what it is. I fully respect people who think this is complete madness, that we can destroy each other 100 times over. And why are we spending vast amounts of money on something that we never want to use? But as I say, this is this strange mental gymnastics that a deterrent works, and you have to provide me with an argument that says it hasn't worked in the last 70 years. It has worked. We haven't seen any more nuclear bombs since Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
It's a really, really complex issue, isn't it? But going back to what you were saying about renewable energy and not necessarily having a need for nuclear power for this base load, it really strikes me that in a city like Plymouth, which used to be very reliant upon work for the military in the form of the dockyard, there could be lots of opportunities to diversify and to get more involved with renewable technology and employment around that, which sort of segues me into a question from Dean, who wanted to ask you a little bit about the future elections in this region. Dean, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, so like a lot of manifestos in the past haven't really put a focus on the Southwest. There's a lot of talk about the Northern Powerhouse in London and even Wales and Scotland, but we have a lot of issues down in the Southwest, particularly regional connectivity, and there doesn't seem to be that focus. Now, there's probably a large scope down here to get good Liberal Democrat MPs in the future. How would you think or focus your strategy around the Southwest, or how do you envision the Southwest fitting into your long-term ambitions, and in particular Plymouth?
So we've already talked about, you know, we have to very realistically look at where we can win next time. And that's at the national level. And we'll probably, and we've burned our fingers with over-ambition in the last general election. And what it meant is that we won nothing. So I think in future, and we were actually very good in the past about being very, very good at targeting. We have to be much cleverer at targeting again. Which national seats are we going to target in the Southwest? But really what the election review has demonstrated is that ultimately we don't just win seats out of the blue. We win seats where we have done a lot of good work and very meticulous hard work on the ground, where we are building strong local Liberal Democrat bases. So let's win locally first, and from there go and win some of our seats back that we used to have in the Southwest. And that doesn't happen tomorrow. That is hard work. It's not particularly glamorous. But as I said, since we believe in local and grassroots activism and local elections, let's focus on local elections, make sure that we get that right, and from there build back our national support. Also, where we actually had historic support, we can win back, and we've got obviously a lot of seats in the southwest where we still have that historic support and big local parties, and let's start from there. I know in Plymouth, I understand you so far haven't got any local councillors, but it's, you know, at some point, if you have had a Labour Party forever, it's between the Tories and the Labour all the time, but at some point, you know, you get in there and demonstrate that as Liberal Democrats, we make very good local councillors. And usually where we get people elected, they're in there for a long time. So for you in Plymouth, I think the biggest challenge is probably to get in there and get your foot in there and build from there with the first 2 or 3 councillors. And that is sometimes very hard. I know you've got a relatively popular local MP. I don't know about your local council, but as soon as you know, there are cracks in the local council and they don't deliver for the local community and for local people, get in there and fight hard. That's how we've won in the past, and that's how we can win again.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if anybody wants to be a candidate for next May's elections, please let me know, because we're going to be starting that process and making sure we have a full slate and a couple of target seats. I think this question is from Richard Bray, I think, about our intellectualism. Richard, do you want to go ahead and ask?
Vera, can I just thank you for your passion for social justice and internationalism, and thinking that we should be a progressive party. I guess for me, that's a lot about also being a radical party. But I think the thing is that if you believe passionately in these things, that you have to have influence and you have to get votes. And we live in an age of populism when we, in a sense, what we are as a party doesn't seem to reflect what's out there. So the key thing is, how do we communicate with that electorate? And I guess grounding that a little bit is to ask you, from a practical point of view, what would be your expectations of what we might achieve at the next general election?
I would say sort of picking numbers out of the air is not particularly helpful. We can say that probably nearer the time, and we are currently globally and nationally living in a very uncertain time. And if you look, for example, what happens in America, what happens suddenly with Trump, what happens with COVID and the economy that is not so shiny anymore, the Black Lives Matter movement and the unrest that is suddenly springing up from America again. I believe in democracy, and you know, no political party, unless you live in a dictatorship, can survive forever. And you know, the next general election is going to look a lot more ropey for the Tory party. They won on get Brexit done. They have to deliver on actually making Brexit a success, which is very doubtful, I think. And I didn't fight Brexit so passionately because I just thought it was a good political issue to pick, but because I believe it's a very foolish adventure, not just foolish, but very damaging for Britain. And but in the next 4 years, a lot of that will have played itself out. But also, you know, the COVID response of the government will be crucial of where we are as a society. So is the eye-watering sums of money that the government is currently borrowing, how are they going to pay that back? People sort of are joking that the Tories have discovered a magic money tree, but that won't go on forever. So are they going to pay it back by more austerity, or are they paying that back by actually raising tax? So there are these sort of big issues about responding to this in a progressive and radical way, or responding to it in a regressive and conservative way. And I think all of this will very soon play itself out. We can call it out. We need to call it by its name and say what it is. We can ask the government these questions, and we will, as in Parliament, about tax. You know, this is a big issue, and we as Liberal Democrats also need to come to terms with what we actually want. I think the last thing we want is another round of austerity, because we know it creates large inequalities. The inequality gap has widened massively during the coalition years and since then, and we need to take some responsibility for it. So going back into the next round of austerity following COVID is the last thing we should do. And if we see the Tory party doing that, that's where we get in and say, hang on, where are we going as a country? Are we wanting even more austerity? Do we want an even more brutal attack on the welfare state? These are the things that are going to play themselves out in the next 4 years.
Thank you, Richard, for the question. I noticed that you wrote, Vera, that you were a councillor during the coalition years, so you saw firsthand the impact of austerity. Do you think as a party we need to make sure that we don't support that kind of austerity again, because not only because it's damaging to citizens, but also well, it's just generally not a good look, is it? And it doesn't speak to our compassionate ideals, I don't think, as a party.
We are a party who believe in people and the right of every person to have a good life. So where inequalities are widening, we are very, very uncomfortable with that. And austerity has clearly delivered that. And we need to take some responsibility of the legacy of the last 10 years. We were for 5 years in the coalition government. It has delivered, us losing in 2015, that then delivered the referendum and Brexit. Everything that happened as a result of the coalition government has been damaging for liberalism and for our ideals and values. So, we should make sure that we also take a little bit of responsibility for what happened in the last 10 years and say, look, that clearly didn't work. And being a councillor in a very deprived area where my colleagues in London agreed to the bedroom tax was just painful. It was, and we should never do that sort of stuff again. Whether it was done because we didn't want to damage the coalition, or whether it was done because people were simply naive and hadn't quite thought through what it would actually mean on the ground. These sort of mistakes, I think we cannot afford again going into the future, and we need to be very, very clear-eyed about that.
I think there's a lot of people that would agree with you on that. Richard Simpson had a question for you about dealing with media bias. Richard.
Hello, I don't know if I can be seen.
Yes, you can.
I can see you, Richard.
Hello, Vera. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your time. It's this idea. I don't think there's an easy solution for this, and I think as a party we've struggled with it for a long time. But trying to get our message fairly across, and to get it across in a fair way and be listened to with such media bias. We know there's a right-wing media, even the progressive media, I would say, a lot of the things I listen to still sort of belittle us as a party and treat us as a bit of a joke. And I know Jo Swinson suffered a lot from interviews she had in the last election from the BBC and things, which seemed to ambush her with questions that they weren't addressing to the other parties. And I just wonder what sort of strategy you might have to try and get into the media and get our message across to the people when there's so much bias in the media.
So I think we shouldn't just use the media as an excuse for not having very clear messages. So some of it might also be that we are just not very clear as a party where we want to be. And I think this leadership contest is probably a good opportunity to be very clear, or coming out of this leadership contest, very clear where we want to be as a party. And it is a little bit going to be this ideological struggle, whether we want to be a centre-right or a centre-left party. And sometimes I wonder whether the reluctance still from our acting leader Ed Davey comes from a history of having worked with the Tory party for 5 years, and ultimately that's where his heart beats. So where do we want to be, and are we clearly recognisable, or are we sitting on the fence like we did in the last general election? And with Jo, unfortunately, and I backed her honestly. I thought she did many things very well, and it was a very, very tough general election for her. But I was surprised how the coalition years kept swinging back at her, and she didn't have any answer. And the election review has also said, we should either have recognized we were going to let Brexit happen, or we would have to fight Brexit, and that was going to be with the Labour Party. And since Jo didn't want to answer that question, so in extremis, which side would you go? Would it be with the Tories or would it be with Labour? We should have said we ultimately have to support even an interim leader of the Labour Party as an interim Prime Minister in order to stop Brexit. So if we wanted to stop Brexit, we would have had to come clean to say we have to work with Labour. That's the only way we can achieve stopping Brexit. But since she didn't want to answer that question, she ended up saying, I'm going to be the next Prime Minister. Well, how daft was that? And it was something that clearly the public didn't buy, and the press didn't buy either. Of course, the press always goes into your Achilles heel. And yes, it is very annoying that we don't have a press that just sort of shouts with us. But we shouldn't always just blame the media for our own failings. We were ourselves at fault of not being very clear of what we actually wanted. And the press goes right in there, and yes, it is tough. I get that. First past the post is tough, but we need to live with these realities. And in other times, we've actually cut through much better. We used to have 60 MPs, now we've got 11. So, something went wrong in the last 10 years. New direction.
Thank you, Richard, for the question. I think the election review, if people on the call haven't read it yet, it really is worth reading, because for me, I found it was like a big sigh of relief that all the things that had worried me as a local party member and as a PPC in the last election, I thought, oh, thank goodness, it's all been recognised, it's here. Now we have to do something about it. And I think you're right. Sometimes our messages just aren't clear enough. So yeah, we have to own our own failures as well. So just moving on to the sort of the theme of membership, really, we've got a question from Chris Oram about our membership base. Chris.
Thank you, Seema, and thank you, Vera, for joining us. You've mentioned the coalition several times, and the coalition is a stick that we've been hit with many a times with austerity and tuition fees and things like that, and it's cost us membership. And membership is what we rely on quite heavily when we're campaigning in our local communities and also from a national point of view. My question to you is, do you have a strategy on improving the membership base nationally? And how would you encourage new members, new supporters to come forward and support us Liberal Democrats?
Actually, we are doing very well in terms of membership, and we have also done well in the last few months to hold on to our membership. And I think the biggest challenge is to hold on to our very big, very much improved membership compared to only 5 years ago. So I think 2/3 of Lib Dem members are new members in the last 5 years. So that's a vast improvement and very encouraging, and one of the very positive things that we've done in the last 5 years. And clearly it's due to the fact that we were having a very clear message on the EU and anti-Brexit. And I know it didn't work very well in Southwest seats in terms of where the sentiment of the overall population was, or the overall electorate, but as a point of being recognizable again, because we actually didn't just pick it as some sort of issue that might be a call to campaign about, but because we passionately believe in internationalism and cooperation on international European on the European level. We were actually back in the media. It is what it is. We have to find the messages that are honest, that are genuine, for which we are recognizable. The press will pick us up for that. We will get into national recognition, and of course we are improving our membership through that. So what is going to be our next big issue? That's obviously the big question about Europe, about the climate emergency, about social justice. There are very big issues that are going to come our way, and we have to formulate very clear messages around that. Let's go to Brexit, for example, or a membership of the European Union. I think as a party, we probably have a historic mission to be the party who will continue to stand up for membership of the European Union. Not tomorrow, not warming up lost battles about Brexit from the last 3 years, but always to be the party to say the best place for us as Britons is to be at the heart of the European project and keep the flame alive that we have an ambition to become members of the European Union once again in the future. Not necessarily in 2 months' time, not in 2 years' time. Let's not get dragged into a precise date for it, but as the idea of that's where we belong as Britons, and Britain as this country, that I think could be very much a historic mission for us as the Liberal Democrats, for which we will be recognized, for which we get into the national media, not all the time, but it's something where we are honestly campaigning for the same thing and don't waver. And then, of course, I'd say our response to the climate emergency, unless we can become a lot tougher on our message and make it actually a very big issue for us as a party, and not just like the Labour Party using it as one of many issues that they want to tackle, but possibly one of our top priorities for what we want to achieve, then I hope we will get recognized again. But let's be very tough on these things and not just wishy-washy. So those sort of things I think are what we need to concentrate on.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks, Vera. Katie has a question which sort of links to the idea of membership. Katie.
Hi, Vera. Thank you, Seema. So it was looking mostly at things happening at the moment. So with the Black Lives Matter movement, some of the controversial tweets by J.K. Rowling, and quite a lot in minority parts of the country and in the world feeling quite targeted and not really involved politically and not feeling represented. So how do we ensure that our membership is more diverse going forwards, but not just getting our diversity from one place like London or from Birmingham, actually getting it locally, regionally and nationally as well?
Just slightly going back to the previous question of what I would do about membership, because I was basically talking about the issues that attract people to us as a party. But once we have got people, and I was the membership secretary for the Bath and North East Somerset Liberal Democrats, and I basically called myself the party officer for fun. So you have to have a bit of fun together. And that's the same with campaigning. So when you're saying, oh, we're looking now for our next campaigning, you know what, guys? It's about having a good time with each other. And campaigning doesn't have to be dry and dreary and about walking yourself blisters. It can also be something where you're having an enormous sense of purpose, where you're finding friendships, where you're campaigning together. And as a membership officer, you also have to make sure that you're not only doing the hard slog, but that you're actually finding opportunities of having fun together. And that is up to the ingenuity of your membership officer to make sure that you find different events. We had obviously the regular pints and politics, but we also had evenings in the mayor's parlour, or we had discussion evenings that were really just about discussions, and we had a lot of them on different issues. So the more you do, the more active your membership officer is, the better. And I'd say sometimes a membership officer is a sort of oh yes, and we also need a membership officer. I think it's one of the most important party jobs that you have, and you need to find somebody who's also quite good with data and following the data around, getting engaged, talking to people, and making sure that you don't just use your members for delivering leaflets, but you value them for who they are. If you've got a membership of 280 people in Plymouth, I bet you it's pretty diverse. Find out where your diverse members are. Try and engage on a very personal level with people. Try to find out why they joined the party. And I know from personal experience that a lot of people join the party and they're not quite clear really what they have to expect. But the more you actually engage on a very personal level with people, say, why don't you come along? Or why didn't you meet so-and-so? People have accused me of being a bit like a sort of 19th century woman who had a salon. But that sort of person, the people who likes to gather people around and say, let's have a social together, or why don't we have a cup of coffee together, and why don't you meet so-and-so? Creating friendships and like-minded people around who you are as a local party is enormously important. And you'll find your diverse members in there as well. And the more friendships and the tighter personal links you create in your party, the more success you will be. So good luck to your membership secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have anything to say on, well, no, you covered that really, is diversity. It's such a huge topic at the moment. I know as a local party, we've been talking about it quite a bit, but you did mention that, so apologies.
I mean, the thing about how do we make progress as a party in order to be more diverse? We have finally achieved that actually we've got more women proportionally than men in Parliament currently, and at local level, I think we are quite well represented. You know, the gender balance is relatively good. And we had obviously always a vexed question around all women shortlists. And as Liberal, we don't feel particularly comfortable with shortlists. I personally believe in shortlists. I think they work. And really, to be quite honest, if we create all women shortlists, we can also create ethnic minority shortlists, or we can possibly have something like, a constituency where they say we just have a shortlist where only candidates with some form of disability can stand. I mean, if we want to go that far, but if we really want to make sure we are completely diverse, our biggest issue is getting people with a disability into Parliament, because it's a terrible place for anybody with mobility problems, a terrible place for people who have got hearing problems, a terrible place for people who are blind. I mean, the most famous or well-known member of Parliament was, of course, David Blunkett, and he's now in the House of Lords. But we will only improve once we improve the working conditions, and it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Only people who work in Parliament and point out what is so dreadful about Parliament and why it is so difficult to work there, if you have a disability, will we understand what we need to change. But if you really want to accelerate the pace of change, I believe you have to create shortlists, and ultimately we might have to create ethnic minority shortlists.
Thanks, Vera. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to just try and make sure that Dudley has the opportunity to ask his question. And there was a couple of questions that cover the same kind of area, really. So, Dudley, would you like to ask your question around PR?
Right, yes, thanks, Seema. Hello, Vera. Do you see that an intention to introduce proportional representation should be a central plank of a proposed alliance to ensure that an extreme party cannot be voted in a future general election by a minority of the electorate again, and including, of course, deciding which version of PR, because there are many?
Absolutely, and the best way of probably resolving that issue, which version of PR, is probably in my mind best done through a citizens' assembly, because that would bring all different aspects of the advantages and disadvantages of different systems to the fore. I know that the Lib Dems are very much wedded to STV. But actually, if you look at the result, it would probably create a similarly disproportionate result unless you create very big constituencies, and then you've got the issues about very big multi-member constituencies. So there are other systems that might deliver a more proportional result. But the first question, of course, you have to ask yourself, why do I have voting reform? It's my ultimate aim to achieve the most proportionality as possible, or do we want, for example, have the freedom of each voter to pick individually their candidate, which is why Lib Dems like STV so much, because they don't really like the idea of party lists that are determined centrally by a central body. You know, this idea about we're independents and we pick our candidate type of thing has led us all to believe very much in STV, but it doesn't actually deliver a very proportional result. So you're absolutely right. There are different systems, and the debate on what is the best system, I don't think should just be had amongst the Liberal Democrats, but obviously needs to be had within the nation. And I think a citizen assembly is probably the best place to resolve that issue. And if we all had, from the progressive parties, because I can't see the Tory party agreeing to that, but from all progressive parties, a similar commitment in every manifesto that they are committed to electoral reform and voting reform, which system should be determined by a citizens' assembly. And then we are not going to get to a decision by a referendum, because we all know that referenda can be horribly abused, but by an act of parliament. If these 3 pillars are agreed by all progressive parties, we might get an edge closer to voting reform.
I think there's a comment from Victor actually about multi-member constituencies working really well. It's the Tories who don't like them, he says. So
it depends. I mean, and here we go. You know, we've got different preferences. I prefer the additional member system, where you continue with a direct link with one MP, and there you create a top-up list in order to create proportionality. And they do that in Scotland, they do that in New Zealand, they do that in Germany. And I always say it's bizarre that the British and the Americans imposed a voting system on Germany that works actually very well, but they don't want to do it in their own countries. But it creates a very proportional result. And the top-up lists are not capped in Scotland and in Wales. The top-up lists are capped. In Germany, the top-up list is not capped. So it means that the number of parliamentarians actually vary from election to election, depending on who's been directly elected. But you know, if you're interested, go onto the Electoral Reform Society's website and look up different voting systems.
Thanks, Vera. I think Jim and Eleanor have both asked questions which are quite closely related. And I think if I just whiz through, basically they're both asking, do you think that any potential pact with Labour, if you were leader, should involve proportional representation and Lords reform as a condition of working together?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to be said for that. Certainly, I mean, there's obviously different issues here. Are we just working together in order to defeat the Tories? And then what's the result if we get a hung parliament? What sort of working arrangement do we have with another party? Or with the Labour Party? We have to be clear about this. Would we go into a coalition again, or would we do a confidence and supply arrangement where we are supporting the government, but we are not in a formal coalition? These are obviously issues for when we have an election result, and how big, you know, how many extra seats they need, and how far the Labour Party would go with their negotiations. But I think as Lib Dems, we should be very tough. On a condition of working together with other parties have to be based on electoral reform, in the way that, you know, if I was a leader, that's the way I would do it. It should be through an act of parliament. It should be which exact system should be determined by through a citizen assembly, and that would be my red line. Whether that be for a confidence and supply or a coalition arrangement, that obviously depends nearer the time of what an election result would be. But I would say that's very important. But the first step to all of this has to be prior to an election, that we get it into the manifesto of each of the parties that we want to work together with. And we have a lot to do with the Labour Party, by the way, because half the Labour Party is not yet committed to voting reform.
Mm. Do you see an elected upper house as being something that's potentially achievable?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yes, but I'd say it's also very important. And in fact, the Labour Party themselves have said in the last election that these constitutional issues and constitutional reform, as I put it, is one of their top priorities, at least they say it, or it's one of their priorities, and they would push all of that into an electoral commission. I worry that the whole thing gets watered down, because then everything gets mixed up together. And also the issue of devolution and so on and so forth. And I would be much tougher and say, all right, yes, other constitutional reforms are very important too, but top priority is voting reform. And I would be very tough on that.
Mm. Yeah, that's really good to hear. I think there has to be reform, doesn't there? It feels like that we're at a point in history where there's got to be lots of different paradigm shifts and changes. I'm going to just sort of go to Alison for the last question, really, because I think this is a really interesting one. She's asked two, one of which I think you've answered, which was about whether we should campaign to rejoin the EU. Should it be a core message? But you talked about that earlier. But Alison, I think this is a really interesting question about economic-based shortlists. Do you want to go ahead and ask that as our final question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very very aware, party, that to campaign costs money and time. And how do you think we can best address that? I actually put forward a motion to South West Region a couple of years ago that we should have economic-based shortlists which required a certain number of seats to only have a candidate who earned the median wage or below. And what do you think, can that order to become diverse in terms of the whole of society?
It's a very interesting idea, and I don't know where did your motion end up in the Southwest Regional Conference? Did you just debate it? Was it voted on?
Yes, it was passed, and I haven't pushed it forward or knew how to after that. But it was passed, and I think some of the people on this call were there and voted for it a couple of years ago. Because and I speak as a PPC previously, and also somebody that tried to get picked for an all-women shortlist. And it just strikes me that if you look at all-women shortlists, often they're full of women who earn loads of money. And I think actually what really, when I'm canvassing and knocking on doors, I think somebody would rather see somebody that they relate to economically. But then again, if you look at our councils, how many people who are elected councillors are earning less, are earning 20 grand or less? Not many.
Well, so there's actually two things there that you mentioned. I have always been appalled how badly remunerated councillors are. And I think that's the big national debate that we also need to have, but it also demonstrates how little the two big parties actually value local councils and local democracy. It's reflected in the poor, appalling remuneration that you get as a local councillor. And absolutely, if you remunerate people in such a bad way, then you only get people who are either retired or who are wealthy enough to support themselves in other ways, or you get a very poor quality of councillors. And yet, we, particularly at unitary level, people who are elected on the council have to make very, very big and wide-ranging decisions affecting the lives of thousands of people in your local area. So why do we not realize that actually we need quality, and we need people who who've got diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences, but unless we actually pay them a wage that makes them live, we won't get these people. So I think that's a separate question of whether parliamentarians are all wealthy people. That's not necessarily true. I mean, as I said, it's an interesting idea. I think your second point resonates far more with what I believe, and that is I would vigorously campaign for a much better recognition of the local council's work and proper remuneration in line with actually the amount of work and the amount of expertise that we are asking of local councillors. And I'm absolutely and totally on board with that. I was frustrated and very angry all the time, and it's still the same now. My councillors in Bath, I think they get something like £8,000 on the unitary authority as a basic level. I mean, who can live off that? Yeah. And yet people don't even know that. They think politicians have their noses in the trough, and they're going to politics because of the money. It's the opposite, of course. But yeah. Would I think it would be a good idea to create all shortlists for women or for anybody under a particular income? It might be quite difficult to see that through practically, but I would need to see the detail of it.
Yeah, I'll send it, because I think it is. Yes, it's difficult, but important things often are difficult, aren't they? And when, as you've been saying, all along tonight, and it does strike me that the Lib Dem often lampooned as the Waitrose party, aren't we? And I would really like to see people who are out of work or part-time workers, single parents, as a priority. So any ideas about how we can actually make that happen, I think would be brilliant, because all women shortlists often ends up with a shortlist of well-off women.
Okay, I mean, you'd have to. We don't really want to get too into the detail of this question. You obviously need to evidence that, but I'm quite happy to look into this.
Super, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alison, for that question. It's really got us all thinking, I think, and it speaks to the kind of values that we have trying to promote equality as a party, which should be at the heart of everything we're doing. I'd just like to say thank you so much to Wera for coming along this evening, virtually visiting us in Plymouth and across the region, Devon, Cornwall and beyond maybe, and giving her time, and to all of you for coming along, asking questions and attending as well. It's been really fantastic to have all of you here and see you on screen and things, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me, giving up your Saturday evening. Please look in the chat, and we've put the link to my video out there, and you watch it again, and also go and visit the website www.werahobhouse.org.uk, where I'm talking and expanding on the issues that we have discussed today. Thank you again, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming along.